He was born in Treorchy in 1924 to a colliery wages clerk in the Rhondda. He's my favourite Welsh scientist because, of course, he is the best type of scientist. He's a computer scientist. I think we kind of often neglect our scientific contribution to the world in Wales, and we often tend to emphasise perhaps our literary or political figures much more. Like, for example, everyone knows who Aneurin Bevan is, or David Lloyd George, or indeed Dylan Thomas. I think because of that, many of our scientific contributions often go ignored or unsung. Now, it's hard to ignore or exaggerate, rather, the groundbreaking contributions made by Donald Watts Davis. He worked alongside Alan Turing, which I'm sure some of you will have probably heard of, in the National Physical Laboratory, and often, actually, much to Turing's annoyance, corrected errors in his papers. He was the first person, Donald Davis was the first person ever to program a computer using AI, so he's responsible for the first use of AI agents. But most importantly, he is responsible for an approach called packet switching, which eventually led to, of course, internetworking protocols. And there can be no doubt that without Donald Watts Davis, that there would be no packet switching, no packet switching, no computer networks, no internet, and no World Wide Web. So the next time someone posits the question, what has Wales done for the modern world, you can point them to Donald Watts Davis, who gave us not only the internet, if you like, and the World Wide Web, but also the first use of AI agents. So what is this packet switching? Well, packet switching essentially allows the breaking down of information into a series of smaller discrete chunks, and called packets, which are then transported down a network and to be reassembled on a different platform or in a different place. And packet switching emerges as a theme in this talk because it's at the core of the packaging of information. The concept is central to communications in the digital era, and we can see it at work in different aspects of society. Now, as a scientist, I'm often kind of amused, bemused, and sometimes downright alarmed by some of the claims made by certain sections of society in the name of science. And I came across this at one point about 10 years ago when I watched a documentary by the name of, I don't know if anyone's seen it, called Behind the Curve, which essentially follows these flat earthers in their quest to prove that the Earth is flat. Now, I wasn't really that interested in the idea of the Earth being flat, but what did interest me, I suppose, was the idea that in the 21st century, how does this section of society actually exist? How can you deny such a scientifically disproven theory? And not only that, but their numbers are actually growing. And I watched an awful lot of flat Earth videos and read quite a lot of blogs, and of course in the name of research. And two things emerged for me. The first thing was that much of the debate that you see in flat Earth videos isn't really about the models of flat Earth, but it's more about the broader sort of attitudes to knowledge structures, and the institutions that that support them. And the second thing is that related to this was that I discovered that flat earthers actually like science and the scientific method. However, they do not like scientists or scientific institutions. This kind of brought me on a strange journey where I discovered the work of a 20th century philosopher by the name of Michel Foucault. And he was very interested in this dynamic between knowledge and power. And at the time he was writing, power had kind of shifted away from religious institutions and had begun to move towards government, bureaucratized government, the media, and scientific institutions. And Foucault actually argued that these sort of institutions maintained their claims to legitimacy by controlling knowledge. And in the 21st century, what we're witnessing is yet another shift in this power to knowledge dynamic. And because knowledge is no longer centrally controlled, we're also seeing a drift away from these singular, agreed narratives into more siloed groups based around sort of shared interests. And this shift is best exemplified by one of the Flat Earth videos I watched, where they invited essentially 4 physics PhD students into their Flat Earth conference for a panel session, for a panel discussion session. And everything was going swimmingly up until one point where there was a point of contention when one of the physicists pleaded with the audience in the panel to avoid trusting YouTube and bloggers. And this elicited a fierce response from the flat earthers to the effect that, along the lines of, now that we've got the internet and mass communications, we're not reliant on what the mainstream are telling us. We can work it out for ourselves. And this struck me as it was a sort of a light bulb moment for me. It struck me that actually this was basically just down to the packaging of information. It was another example of how information was broken down and packaged up in a particular way. Ironically, it is the World Wide Web and the internet and Davis's original developments that have actually facilitated and allowed this to happen. So in tandem to this, we also see in the last few years that there are some that power structures are actually decoupling themselves from scientific knowledge. So speaking of an alternative reality, we now find ourselves in this strange sort of world for the last few years. And from an educational perspective, with generative AI and large language models. And from a educational perspective, I've had a number of colleagues, although they're quickly changing their minds, up until fairly recently, who've kind of equated this to the advent of the calculator in education. However, the actual threat from large language models and generative AI is actually much broader, more fundamental, and too real, really, to be dismissed by such an analogy. Large language models, and indeed what some people term AI chatbots, or even some people term an AI. I asked an AI, and that really gets my goat as a computer scientist, because AI is a field, not a noun, and possess this sort of uncanny ability to generate extremely human-like text sequences of words based on their comprehension of the transformation of human-supplied prompts in order to generate these sort of full responses. Now, it's important to say a bit about large language models and the large language view of the world, which is essentially a super corpus of structured, semi-structured, and unstructured text. And that's, once again, returning to this idea of information packaging is broken down into a series of tokens before it is then sort of used to measure the distance between these tokens before supplying you with an answer that's kind of aligned with this, with the prompt that you have supplied it with. The comprehension, if you want to call it that, which is essentially just a transformation of these large language models, can be kind of summed up as the collective online publications of the mostly English-speaking world for the last 10 years, writing publicly online, as it were. It does not mean, and they do not represent, a fair, recent, and sufficiently broad representative sample of human knowledge across cultures and languages. So effectively, we've ended up in this situation very similar to the flat earthers, where we've packaged up this information in a particular way. From an academic perspective, we know that learning equips students with the skills to acquire knowledge. However, learning is hard. It's messy. It takes focus. It takes someone to guide you through it, and all of these other things. In university, of course, the best way of gaming this system is true learning. From the perspective of the student, however, it's inefficient, particularly when there are many alternative, shorter paths, but that offer less struggle and more freedom, but obviously varying degrees of risk. And it's kind of into this situation that LLMs have been sort of thrown like a grenade, and the effects and the fallout are entirely too predictable. The whole point of large language models when applied to learning is to actually remove struggle. Yes? So no matter how good large language models are or become, they will always sort of prioritize a future where that replaces sort of human learning with convenience by design. Now, there's a conflict of interest, if ever I heard one. Large language models essentially short-circuit the student's ability to learn the skill of learning to think. And they also short-circuit the opportunity for students to authentically write, synthesize, reason, and struggle. By reinforcing a vision that equates learning to getting the correct answers regardless of the path that you've chosen. And the problem for LLMs, or large language models, is that they change this learning equation subtly and problematically, even for students that are normally invested in this process. So, for example, if you take a student asks a large language model for the answer, if you like, to a particular problem they have, they get the answer and the rationale and everything else, an explanation of why this particular question is right. However, the fundamental issue here is that comprehending a solution and solving a problem are two entirely different skills. And the problem they have, in many ways, lots of students have shifted the task as set by the lecturer from one of solving a problem to one of reproducing and recreating and comprehending a solution to a problem. And we have actually in computer science a problem like this called the P=NP problem. But I'll spare you the details of that. Now, in informal, off-the-record conversations I've had with students, because I have to have them informally and off the record, when I ask them about, why are you making so much use of large language models? Do you not think it's better to try and learn? Because if you learn something, you will be able to apply it in the general sense. And the sentiment echoed is one that's surprising, but also strikingly similar to something we covered already. And that is that the general attitude is we don't need academic instruction, we're not reliant upon it, and we can work it out using large language models. Am I comparing students to flat earthers? No, but also yes. No, in the sense that they're trying to achieve two different things. One is trying to maximize a set of metrics. The other group is on a wild goose chase. And yes, in the sense that the results are exactly the same. So where does that kind of leave us? It kind of leaves us in a funny situation where the packaging of information in the digital age has become a double-edged sword. On the one hand, what we have is the democratization of knowledge, and to go back to that knowledge versus power sort of dynamic. But on the other hand, we also have these very significant downsides to human learning. Thank you very much.